Alright YouTube, it's time for the Occult video 66, Auras and Clairvoyance. I will throw in ESP here, and also to a lesser degree channeling, specifically in the kind of way that like Mark Age does it. Now Mark Age, if you don't know, is sort of a UFO cult. Some of their members have died waiting for UFOs. They've actually starved themselves to death in remote areas waiting for the mothership to take them away. So it's a little bit kooky. Take a look at at the artwork for many of their booklets, especially The Birth of Astrid, and you'll quite clearly see that it is indeed a cult. It's fairly obvious just looking, when you can look at just the manuscripts that a group puts out and you can say that they're kooky, that's when you know there's a fucking problem. As far as auras go, I will say this. I'm more or less ambivalent on the topic of auras existing at all. I think it has more to do with psychology. I do believe in ESP. I do believe that there are sensory capabilities that humans use that aren't fully quantified. There are more than 5 senses. That's been known by science for a while. I do believe humans respond to electromagnetism. I do believe humans respond to some of the chemicals and pheromones around them that are not immediately able to be determined through any of the 5 normal senses. For instance, the fact that you can't directly smell them doesn't mean they're not around. This is, by the way, why I believe that the behavioral sync operates so virulently in urban settings. The reason why people breed less in urban settings, I believe, has to do with the suppression of their sexual drive and the suppression of their fertility by the constant presence of pheromones, which is nature's way of saying you're overcrowded, you need to stop reproducing. Doesn't work so well in fast breeding creatures as it does in slower breeding creatures. I think you need to reduce the concentration of humans to ameliorate this problem. And all the xenoestrogens in plastics, admittedly, the one thing I'll readily agree with homeopaths on, it's probably not the greatest of ideas from the perspective of male fertility. That being said, I do not believe in Kirlian photography and all of these sort of tips and tricks that people have to read auras. Or the more psychic side of it, like, oh, for $5.99, I can tell you what color your aura is. Not a big believer in that stuff. If there's profit to be made, I generally discount it unless it's proven that there's some effectiveness to it. I would say the history of photography, you have to look back. This begins relatively early in the photographic age. What's happening is something akin to the development of any other technology and its almost immediate application to the spiritual in all cases. You look on the internet, you can find an internet Ouija board. You can find internet tarot cards that you can generate. You'll find fortune-telling generators and e-fortune cookies and all of these things. It's being exploited for general interest and often, unfortunately, for money. Not always directly. You know, maybe they're taking ad revenue instead of charging people a subscription fee. Okay, that's fine. I have no problem with that. I don't have a problem with them making money off of anything, no matter how kooky it is within the occult. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that it's effective. The idea that you can photograph somebody and see their aura, I just don't necessarily believe in that. I think it's just a photographic trick that people thought was very fun early on. You can look at, for instance, spirit photography. The idea, Lincoln's wife used to be readily into this. After Lincoln died and her sons, several of her children had died, she turned to spirit photography, channeling, seances and stuff like that, sort of the Blavatsky side of the occult. Now, Blavatsky was a fraud. She was exposed as a fraud multiple times. She wrote those psychic letters that supposedly appeared around her apartment. She wrote them. They were in her own handwriting. She was exposed as a fraud who used secret levers and switches and so forth to do all sorts of spiritual stuff. The existence of ectoplasm at seances around the Victorian era was explained. It was a parlor trick. That's all it was. It was interesting. It was spooky dooky, and people enjoyed it and were entertained by it. But there were some people who went further. They literally believed in these things, and spirit photography and aura photography fit hand in hand on this token. The same would be true of channeling and clairvoyance. That is, usually it's nothing more than a parlor trick. I happen to be a believer, and I don't say this ironically. I do believe that humans, occasionally, through whether a spiritual means or a scientific means, it really makes no difference. Tesla attested to this personally himself. I do believe that humans occasionally receive messages, not necessarily fully intelligible, but they receive ideas or words or concepts from a non-human source. I do believe that because we've got people who were brilliant who attest to that. I will personally attest to it myself, related to my literature, related to my interest in geology and plants. I've spoken of this before. Do I call it like demons as a Christian would believe in it? Do I call it God's message or something like that? No. I say whether it's scientific or spiritual makes no difference to me. The difference is, though, when people are claiming to be able to channel, or they're claiming clairvoyance, they most often are charging you for it, which is unethical, in my opinion. If they have such a power, they shouldn't be capitalizing upon it, because it's something that is special, and they're cheapening it by doing so. It'd be a little bit like going to the Oracle and paying your silver to get a question answered by the Oracle at Delphi or something like that. Or going to a church, getting your sins forgiven in exchange for a tithe. Or, oh, I paid an indulgence, so now I don't have to go to purgatory as long. Well, that's a good way to make money because you've convinced people that they have a need of something that in many cases is completely imaginary. As far as ESP goes, though, it's a different story. I do believe in ESP. I believe that there are more than 5 senses. It's fairly obvious. I believe that humans occasionally respond to things that aren't fully quantified by science. Now, are they able to be quantified by science? Yes. I believe that they are mundane phenomena that take on an aspect of the spiritual and unexplained because we can't explain them yet, but we do have the means to do so given enough time and the inclination to experiment upon such things. As opposed to perhaps the idea of a cosmic message from beyond. Say that it's aliens beaming down intelligence to chosen human beings, that's fine. I happen to believe in UFOs and aliens, not necessarily visiting Earth directly. 99% of all the UFO pictures, they're obviously hoaxes. But yeah, maybe, occasionally, maybe we do occasionally get visited by the little green men. Not sure why they wouldn't use cloaking devices, but that's a totally different issue. As far as ESP goes, yes, it's absolutely true. Yeah, there are ways. I don't believe that people necessarily can control it, though. And that's the difference. Miss Cleo or something like that would say, oh, well, I can control my powers. I can read your fortune. I can channel for you. I can have a seance with your dead husband. And they'll generally charge you for this. Or they're using it for notoriety. If they're doing it pro bono, they're still putting their message out there, and they'll start charging money perhaps in the future. But they're claiming to be able to fully control these things. Now, why haven't any of these people ever attempted to tell others how they can control it to any degree of satisfaction? Therein lies the problem. You'd think that at least one individual among them would say, oh, well, why don't I write a book on how to do all of these things in such a way that people will attest to the fact that it actually worked. Instead, what we get are rudimentary guides to your psychic powers, your inner light, or something like that, and they never work. It's all a bunch of hocus pocus. And they're selling them in order to make money. Unfortunately, what it appears to be the case is that insofar as it exists, which I believe in, it is involuntary and largely out of the control of the people who are exhibiting these capabilities. That is, Nikola Tesla never said, oh, well, I conduct a bunch of rituals and that's how I'm inventing all these things. No, what he said is, I receive messages from beyond, from the center of the universe, essentially. I receive messages from what he termed the divinity, you could call it the Godhead, or a cosmic source, or UFO mothership, or whatever you happen to relate it to. He did claim that. It's quite literal, and he's on record quoted as saying so. But he never claims that he can directly control these things. He just says, yeah, I'm getting these weird messages all the time. Now, whether this was some sort of latent psychosis in an otherwise genius mind that was overwhelmed by its own genius, or whether it really was an external source all along, it doesn't really matter now, does it? It did happen, and it's something that science hasn't quite quantified. I do, however, believe that given enough time it can. But as far as auras go, I believe kind of agnostically in the idea that other people may occasionally sense things about you that they would call an aura, sort of an encompassing energy or feeling that you give off in some way, shape, or form. As far as photographing it or trying to quantify or control it, especially where you're making money off of it, I'd be much more hesitant about endorsing such an idea, let's say. That being said, again, ESP, yes. Auras, maybe. Certainly, it's within the realm of possibility. Channeling, nah, not really. Unless you're talking about an involuntary ESP-based impulse or something like that. Clairvoyance, no, it's a parlor trick. The very idea is sort of Blavatsky level weird stuff from the eugenics or pre-eugenics era that was used as literally a parlor trick. I've said this before about tarot, Ouija, and all of these other things. They're parlor tricks. Mesmerism, for the most part, although it can have a medical application and it can have an occult application. That's about all. Peace out.